just, it's good stuff. It's good human stuff. It's good mindset stuff. And there's no one better to talk about mindset and kind of add something to your bucket and touch your soul than Heather Peruki. So Heather, the stage is yours.
Oh, well, thank you, Chad. I feel like you take your introductions like one step up every single time. And I feel like this topic is very appropriate to that lovely introduction. But, as always, I'm super grateful to be here with you. Yes, I'm on vacation because I'm out of town, but I've accompanied my partner while he's working. So I actually am doing a little bit of hybrid, which is kind of cool for those of you that are able to hybrid work. I'm a little bit more open to the idea of doing that coming forward because I found it a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. So other than the time change, because it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon here, I think like getting used to this is probably going to be easier than I thought it was. But today I'm bringing you one of my absolute favorite topics in the entire world, imposter syndrome. I think we talk a lot about this, and I think we talk about the little pieces of it, but I am going to share some of my very personal experiences with imposter syndrome today. And as always, you guys can interrupt me if you have questions. You can certainly ping the chat. I think Chad usually watches the chat just in case I don't catch it. But imposter syndrome is this really sort of vague topic that we talk about, we like maybe joke about sometimes, but is actually a very real phenomenon for a lot of us. And the reason that I wanted to talk about this is one, selfishly, because I wanted to learn more about it, but two, because I think it can help us understand each other from a different perspective. I think, the reason I wanted to research this is not to accuse or not to impress upon anyone that they need to be dealing with this, but rather to better understand why sometimes we feel like an imposter, why we feel like we're faking it, why we feel like we shouldn't be in the room. And just as a little caveat for you guys to sort of tuck in the back of your mind, I am a huge believer in eliminating the word should from your vocabulary. Should, generally speaking, implies shame. So if you say to yourself in the morning, oh, I should work out, generally speaking, that's going to make your brain think that you need to do it because you're doing something wrong, rather than, oh my gosh, I am totally looking forward to spending 45 minutes walking outside, enjoying the sunshine and moving my body because my body can do that sort of thing. And so if I can give you a little nugget of wisdom other than the imposter syndrome today, it would be to totally eradicate and eliminate and bury the word should from your vocabulary because you almost never need to use it. Today, my why is because I'm grateful to be here with you and that you're sharing this hour with me, but also because there are lots of times when I feel super curious about why people hire me to do anything. I think it's a super normal emotion. I sort of watch video of myself or watch kind of playbacks of Zoom meetings, and I'm like, why in the world did people decide to hire me? And like, what the heck do I even know about anything? So we're going to dive a little bit into imposter syndrome today and hopefully have a little bit of a discussion about it at the end. Last month, why do I always think this is weekly? But last month we had a lot of fun talking at the end of our session, and I felt like we had some really rich kind of back and forth. So let's first talk about what it is. Imposter syndrome is this idea that you've only succeeded due to luck. It has nothing to do with your talent or how many trainings you've taken or how much time you've invested in yourself or qualifications. It's this idea that you've only succeeded because somebody gave you a chance, or only succeeded because you walked into the family business, or only succeeded because you happen to know how to shape a surfboard, or you happen to know how to write a contract, or you happen to know how to sell a donut at a donut shop, not because you're actually good at it. And I think this plays into a lot of things sort of overarching, like our self-esteem, our ability to be aware of why people are grateful for us, why people compliment us, things like that. The other, like the mind blowing thing that I found when I started researching this was that imposter syndrome has only been around, identified as a concept since 1978. For those of you that were born around there, I feel like that's 20 years ago. But I realize that 1978 is much longer than 20 years ago. But it's this sort of interesting concept to me that just when we were starting to really understand hiring people for their talents rather than hiring them for their family name or because it's somebody's son or daughter or because it's somebody's cousin or brother or whatever, we've started to really lean into people's talents as opposed to the family that they come from. And so these two psychologists, Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes, which I thought was an interesting pronunciation of that, they theorized that it really was only women that were impacted by this idea of imposter syndrome. And what kind of blows my mind about that is this is definitely a time when we were pivoting into way more women in the workforce. Many less women were staying home with their children, more were looking for careers. We started to move a little bit towards not every couple having children. So women were wanting to have a career outside the home and not just be a mom or identify as a parent. And so these two psychologists theorized, like, we think this is really only something that impacts women. And then, interestingly enough, the more research they did, the more it was suggested that imposter syndrome can actually impact anyone, regardless of socioeconomic status, gender, race, where you grew up, where you live. So it became this concept that could impact anyone. And now we define it. I mean, Audrey Irvin kind of came up with this definition of it, but now in general, we consider imposter syndrome applicable to anyone who isn't able to internalize and own their own successes. So what does this mean? Well, this means when you sit down with your boss and you say, wow, I'm so excited to learn from you. I'm so excited to understand what you've done with your career. And, I really admire the work that you've done. Not expecting that your boss is going to say, well, I just got here because I got lucky. I just got here because my boss gave me a chance. They oftentimes will attribute their successes to something other than just their talent. And so Audrey Irvin was like, I want to dive into this. So now all of us are going to dive into it. So anyone who isn't able to internalize and own their own successes. This means if you love school and you get straight A's, I don't even know if we really talk about this anymore, but you come out of college with a 4.0 and then you get an amazing job, you won't ever attribute that to your studying, your determination, the likelihood that you spent your school years in the library studying rather than spending time doing other things that maybe were less conducive to your studies, but rather that somebody just gave you a chance. So what do we know about imposter syndrome now? Well, we know that we don't know everything about it. And I think what's interesting for me is when I started to think about this idea that the only reason that people gave me a chance is because I had some sort of, friend of a friend or some sort of opportunity that just sort of like randomly happenstance. It's that there are patterns of behavior and patterns of thought in my life that lend themselves to me believing that I'm an imposter. With full transparency, one of those things is when I was growing up, if I got a B, it was, why didn't I get an A? And when my sister got an A, my sister is very book smart and she's a lovely human and I would never talk badly about her. But when my sister would get an A, my parents would say things like, well, your sister got an A and we were only 18 months apart. So sometimes those things really stung. And what I realized was over the course of my life, I was pretty consistently or constantly being compared to someone else. And so it led to this feeling of, well, what am I good at anyway? And it impacted my self-esteem in such a way that I pretty rarely ever felt like I was supposed to be in the room. I felt like somebody had put me in the room because I was going to take up space or because they had room for me or because it was fine if I came, rather than we're so excited to hear what you're going to talk about, or we're so excited to have you here. We're grateful that you've decided to spend time with me. So these patterns of behavior as I was growing up really lent themselves to me believing that I was never really supposed to be in the room. And it took a lot of kind of self-esteem work for me to really come to terms with the fact that A, I was dealing with imposter syndrome, and B, I could overcome it. And interestingly enough, based on the research, some theories point to traits of personality that sort of contribute to being more prone to imposter syndrome. This is childhood anxiety. This is sometimes compulsivity or having to have things a certain way, feeling scatterbrained. If you think about, maybe this is less general knowledge, but if you think about all the children that deal with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, that feeling of scattered or inability to focus on one task at a time can certainly contribute to this idea that I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be here. Some of the other theories in this research included growing up in stressful family situations, never feeling good enough, focusing on a sibling that perhaps needed more attention or a sibling that was better at things. My husband's sister has 4 children, and they spend a lot of time not comparing their children. And it's interesting because each of them are good at something. The youngest, who's the only boy, is this baseball phenom, but they never compare the 3 girls' baseball talents to Pete. They always talk about the girls' talents independently of Pete. First of all, he's the only boy, so that's kind of an interesting dynamic too. But when we grow up in these family situations that feel very stressful or feel very anxiety ridden, that can lend itself to feeling like an imposter later in life. Sometimes environment can play a part, and I want to be very careful when we talk about this idea of environment playing a part in your sense of belonging. I don't want you guys to think that if you feel nervous or shy or a little out of place in a room full of people, that it's because you feel like an imposter. It can be related to lots of different things. But when we're in environments where there are lots of confident people, and there are people that already feel connected to each other, that can sometimes lead to us feeling more alienated. And so then we'll feel like, why are we here? Like, I clearly don't fit in with this room of people. So I don't feel like I belong here. That can sometimes lead to us feeling like an imposter as well. And if I think about your guys' environment and what you do for work, this can really be especially true for a lot of your work being about what people are doing based on competence. And so sometimes competition can be really inherent, right? Who sold, who didn't, who's got the most listings, who turns their listing over the fastest. Although right now in our state of the world, I don't even know if that's being considered as anything. But this feeling of being an imposter can really be especially true when you're watching other people in a similar field experience success. It can lead to us feeling less successful, even though it may not have anything to do with us. You guys all with me so far? It's a lot of like theory and information in the beginning. So this led to Matthews and Clance really elevating their research to this whole other level of what we call the internal experience of intellectual phoniness. So this is folks who actually experience a lot of success, but are really unable to internalize that. And so it led to this idea that our psychological well-being is significantly impacted by this self-destructive language that goes around and around and around in our brain. I'm not supposed to be here. I'm not good enough. And, at the end of the day, it came to this point where we start to limit our own acceptance of how good or how well we are based solely on comparing ourselves to other people. I think I've shared this with you guys before, but in my therapy practice, I talk a lot about comparison stealing our joy. When we start to look at what other people have or other people don't have, or what we wish we had that other people have, we start to compare ourselves, and it starts to steal and suck all of that joy out of our internal self, because we know that we feel like we'll never be able to compare to this other person. So when we have this constant language of I'm not good enough, I'll never be good enough, even though we have diplomas hanging on the wall and we've done training and people come to us for things, we start to really internally limit our own acceptance of that success. So they took this and they put it into this very detailed chart. And I'm not going to go into a ton of specifics about it, but these really are rooted in achievement related tasks or tasks that demonstrate something. So selling a house. So how many therapy clients I have on my caseload, how many dollars I make in a year for my business, things like that. And so when you have this idea of an achievement related task, we put this task out in front of us, and then it leads to things like anxiety, self-doubt, worry, like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to meet this metric. Oh my gosh, I could never sell that house. Oh my gosh, it's way too expensive. I totally couldn't handle that. And we start to tell ourselves, it doesn't matter if I'm being gifted this listing or if I'm having, if somebody's asking me for my help, I'm definitely not worthy. And so then that anxiety and that self-doubt starts to lead to things like over preparing, or I'll get to that later. I'll get to that later. And then you get to it later and you're like, crap, I haven't done anything to do. Oh, shoot, now I'm screwed. And so these feelings of compulsion and anxiety and worry really lead to this idea of, I have to do more. I have to do more. I have to do more. And then we start to believe that if we accomplish that thing, we get a feeling of relief, but we forget on the outside to sort of attribute it to like us actually doing anything. And we think that if we over prepared for it, it's only because we put a ton of work into it. And then if we procrastinated on it, it's only because we got lucky. And so even if we get really good feedback on finishing that task, we totally discount it. We're like, it's only because I stayed up all night preparing, or it's only because I happened to think of that slide at the last minute and have that answer. And then we totally, completely discount any positive feedback that we got. And then we just perceive that we're a huge fraud. And because we haven't been able to say to ourselves, wow, I really killed that presentation, we totally attribute it to something related to luck. The next time an achievement related task comes to us, and it likely will because you totally killed the presentation, we go back into that spiral of anxiety and self-doubt, and we either over prepare or we procrastinate. And then we tend to attribute those things to either, well, I just stayed up all night working on it, or oh, I just got lucky. And so what we want to do is start to look at this idea of, what am I going to do about this? I know that feeling like an imposter doesn't feel positive to me. I know that when somebody calls me and says, oh my gosh, agency A told us you did this amazing job on this de-escalation training, and we're so excited for you to have you come and speak to our agency, my first thought needs to no longer be, oh my God, why would they want to hire me? That petition, like, it's just garbage. I don't even know why anybody would hire me to do that. Instead of thinking that, we want to start to learn to shift to like, oh my gosh, I would love to participate in that with you guys. And I would love to bring what I know about this subject matter to your agency. So there's totally hope. I will never, which I almost never use that word, but I will never come to you guys without some sort of solution or some sort of movement in another direction. So there's actually a pretty incredible amount of research around self-esteem, the power of believing in ourselves, things like that. But I really want to take you guys in a completely step-by-step process with some examples to be able to help you combat this idea that you're not good enough, or that you're just a fraud and you're sort of waiting for people to figure that out. I want to help move you guys towards this idea that you're being hired for your skills and for your talent and for the things that you can bring to someone or something, as opposed to luck or because somebody knows you. So the very first thing that we want to do when an imposter thought comes into our brain, like, oh my God, I'm definitely not good enough to do this presentation, is we want to acknowledge it. And this is where a lot of us forget. We forget to acknowledge that thought as something that exists. And I want to think to myself, that's really interesting. I just responded to a request to be involved with somebody's agency and totally discounted the fact that they asked me to come and participate with them. That's really interesting. And then you can go a little bit deeper into, where might that have come from? Well, it comes from, I woke up late this morning, I didn't get a workout in, I felt super unprepared, and maybe I'm just having one of those days where in general, I just kind of feel like garbage. And then we want to take that thought and we want to put it into perspective. We can ask ourselves a question like, what might this mean that I'm tending towards thinking I don't belong with this group, or I'm not able to do this presentation? What might that mean? Where might that thought be picking at us a little bit? Where might our brain be nitpicking us just a little bit? for me, when I have those impostery thoughts, I tend to actually picture myself on like, please don't laugh at me, but I tend to think about myself on thought Tinder. Like, this thought's coming up on my screen and I'm just going to swipe it away. And I forgive me, I never can remember which one is good and which one is not so good. But whatever way is, I don't need this thought and it's not going to serve me today, I swipe that way. I, I think it's swipe left, but don't quote me on that. If anybody knows, please tell me. But I want to understand and acknowledge that this thought has come into my brain. And I want to sort of like watch it pop up on my Tinder screen and go, huh, yep, don't need that. And then I want to ask myself this question: does this help me? Like, does feeling this way about a potential opportunity help me? Or does it just sort of like dive me deeper into believing that I can't do something? And these first three solutions or steps in this kind of thought reframing is allowing yourself the 15 to 20 seconds that it's going to take for you to acknowledge what you're thinking. When we get into modes that are anxious or modes that are more towards the depressed side, we tend to just send them away instead of acknowledging like, I'm having this thought and it doesn't feel really good to me and it doesn't seem like it's going to help me. So I'm going to move on to changing this automatic thought. And remember, this takes time. This isn't something where you can like swipe right and the thought never comes back again, or swipe left and I can't remember. But this isn't like if I just swipe it away, it'll never come back. This is about practicing. I can totally change the way that I think about this. I can acknowledge a thought and flip it. And when your boss comes to you and says, I don't have a boss, but when I come to myself and I say, Heather, what are you talking about? Of course, this is a super cool opportunity. And of course, you want to embrace this and you want to go meet with this agency and talk about de-escalation. You love talking about de-escalation. You're learning how to help your brain reframe an unhelpful thought into a super helpful thought. And when I go to myself, I have to allow myself the ability to reassure myself, dude, you're totally a badass. If you weren't a badass, people wouldn't be asking you to do stuff. So this is about some of those really simple, not easy, but simple reframes to the thoughts that pop into our heads that are really unhelpful. And remember too, many of our reactions to things are our feelings masquerading as reactivity. They really are our insecurities or our old nasty belief systems that don't really serve us anymore popping up. So remember that the moments that you feel like you're not good enough can be fleeting. And even if you have that thought pop into your brain, it doesn't need to last forever and it doesn't need to define you, but you can acknowledge it, maybe pause, take a second, put it into perspective, and then say, that's not really helping me. And I'm a badass. So I'm going to say yes. So you don't necessarily have to write all the steps down and memorize them, but just remember that when a thought that doesn't necessarily serve you very well pops into your head, you have the power to say, that thought is nonsense and I don't need it. So again, I rarely ever use these super concrete never or always words because they're rarely ever true. The idea that you're never something or always something is actually a huge fallacy. It's almost impossible to always feel a certain kind of way or never feel a certain kind of way. I have a tendency not to be jealous. Jealousy is something that's really kind of never come into my brain space. But people like to ask me questions that imply that I need to be jealous about something. For example, my husband's a photographer. He often is in the water shooting surfing. So there are people wearing a lot less clothing than usual when they're surfing. And people love to say, oh, do you really think it's okay that your husband does that? And I just say to them, that's his job. I mean, sometimes I'll take it one step further and make them really uncomfortable by telling them that people become emotionally naked with me And that will usually end the conversation because as a therapist, people come to me and they talk to me about things that are really difficult. But the truth is, we almost never feel always or never something. And so, because our feelings are sort of fleeting, we can take them, sort of grab them by the neck, shake them, and send them away. We have the power to do that. And we don't have to race each other. When imposter syndrome starts to come in because you're doing a lot of comparison, or you're taking somebody's 10-year real estate career and comparing it to your 18-month real estate career, there's no winner in that situation. He or she doesn't win because they've been doing it longer. They've just been doing it longer. And so it's likely that they've learned lots of tips and tricks. They've taken thousands of hours of training. They've read hundreds of books and probably worked with a lot of coaches that have helped them feel confident in such a way that their career has been on a trajectory. In addition to that, they've learned how to feel more confident over those 18 years. And so, because you're new or newer, it doesn't mean that you're better or worse than someone else. It just means that you're in a different place than them. So there's no real winner when it comes to things like competency. Yes, two students can take the ACT and get vastly different scores and get into vastly different schools, but it doesn't necessarily change the trajectory of where they're going. In addition, you are in control of how you react to things, and you have the right to distinguish and create a feeling around what's actually happening. So if we take the walking into a room example, when you walk into a room and you've got 20 agents who have all been extraordinarily successful and you're there to observe their success, then let that be what's happening in the room. You don't have to walk into that room and think, oh my God, all these people are so far along in their career and they're so successful. Who the heck am I? Well, you're the person that's exactly where you are at that particular point in time. I think about sometimes therapists who went to undergrad, went straight into their master's, and maybe even got a doctorate and started their full-fledged career at the age of 28. And I think to myself, wow, think of all the people I could have helped if I had become a therapist when I was 26, instead of becoming a therapist when I was 30. But I don't know that that thought actually really helps me at all. If anything, that thought just makes me feel worse. And so, since it's not really serving me, I think I'm just going to swipe and let that kind of go off into the ether. And I think with social media, that has been something that has become very obvious to me. There's lots of really amazing, smart therapists on Instagram that are putting out this amazing content. And I'm like, wow, if Instagram had been around when I was 28, would I have? And then I have to stop myself and sort of peel backwards a little bit and be like, wait a second. I don't have to feel that way. This isn't a game. There's no winner because this particular therapist on Instagram puts out great content at the age of 28 and I'm 41. So I am in control of how I react to those sorts of things. And I, generally speaking, tend to flip that thought to, oh my gosh, that's amazing content. I'm totally going to write that down and use it. And so the treatment or the trick to combating imposter syndrome is actually quite simple. Those steps are not complicated. They might not feel easy, but they are not complicated. It is about understanding how you feel, recognizing the emotion that comes with it, and then doing the work to reframe the way that you have self-belief. And, in a sort of biased way, I think it would be really interesting if all of us went to go meet with a mental health clinician and talked about our life and our fears and our admirations and things like that, and had somebody help us unpack this. But the truth is, you don't necessarily need that. You can start to pay attention to those times when you feel less well or you feel less relevant, and start to look for those opportunities where you can switch that relevance idea into being reverent, or being in a space simply because you're in a space. So when you go and you're celebrating these 20-year veterans in the real estate industry, understand that that's a huge opportunity for you to learn about yourself, learn about the industry, and maybe set some goals so that in 20 years, perhaps it's you being celebrated. Any questions so far? I know I went kind of fast. We have less people today, so there's more pressure for you to ask questions, FYI. Otherwise, I can just call on you like we're in class. I don't know. Do we consider this a class? Is this like school?
A mastermind.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my imposter brain just turned on. It was like mastermind. I'm not a mastermind. What do I know about anything? We just had a literal imposter syndrome happen in this exact moment. But the last thing I want to sort of impress upon you guys is this, and I left the link at the bottom of the slides. I can send it to you guys too. But I read through this kind of 10 steps to overcome imposter syndrome when I was putting this slide deck together. And it really struck me at how simple these rules were. Like, if you've been operating under this assumption that you're supposed to like know the answer to everything, or you're never supposed to need help, or you should always know what the right direction is, or you should always be able to find the perfect home, or always be able to serve your peers or your leadership in such a way, start like really asserting the fact that you don't have to do those things. Like, you don't have to be perfect in order for something to be really amazing and really enjoyable. This applies obviously outside of your workplace too, in your relationships. I sometimes talk about my partnership. I'm definitely not a perfect human being, but what we have done in my partnership is really talk about the things that are important to us, so that when we do make mistakes, we can start to say, hey, I really feel like I went sideways with that. Like, I think I hurt your feelings, or I think I did something maybe that like made you mad. Like, can we chat about that? And we've been practicing that over the last 14 years. And so when you write the rules, or you correct the rules, or you change the rules because the old nasty always never rules are ruining your day-to-day, start changing them. You can go to your leadership at your company and say, hey, this means of operation isn't working for me. Is there a way that we can do it another way, because I'm having a hard time with X? So you have just as much right as the next person to be wrong. You also have just as much right to be right. You have just as much right to have a totally off day where you're grouchy and you don't want to be around people, and you actually kind of hate people, and your coffee was wrong, and somebody parked in your parking spot, and you had a flat tire on your way to work and you had to change it, and then you sweated through your clothes, and so then you had to go take another shower, and like all of these things happen. You're allowed to have an off day. Nobody expects you to come into the office or work remotely after you've had a morning like that. My mornings are always a little set off when somebody crosses the street when they see my pit bull coming. I always get a little angry and a little hot under the collar because she's actually quite well behaved. But I don't have to help that person understand me in order for me to have just as much right to exist on the sidewalk. So I left a little link for you guys if you want to read through some of the steps of overcoming imposter syndrome. It's actually a pretty simple list, and I thought it was very helpful. So hopefully it'll give you a little bit of a boost in your day. I'm curious to hear about your guys' thoughts, because so many things came through my brain that you guys would potentially ask about that I could have probably done 50 slides. But because we had such a rich discussion last time, I thought I would give you guys a little extra time to maybe brainstorm with me about some questions. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Not everybody at once now.
I'll share something. It's interesting is in our industry, it's almost like hard not to have or experience this. This is something that, I deal with. I'm sure that everyone else deals with to some extent too, but or at least in my mind, so I don't want to speak for everyone, but in my mind, sometimes you get stuck in the feeling of our life cycle resets every 30 days. So you could have an unbelievable month and close X amount of transactions. It's like the new month comes and I got nothing. What did I do this month? I'm not worth anything this month as I was last month. Or, in my case, I'm licensed in a handful of states, and and I keep getting more and more and more. And when I'm asked to speak on different panels, I'm like, are you sure you want me to talk? I don't know what I'm talking about. So I get that a lot. I feel that a lot. So I can imagine a lot of individuals that are here or maybe watching on the recording on Facebook. Hopefully you can relate, but I feel like it's natural to experience that, especially in an income, a commission income driven job like we are, where sometimes this is interesting. I was talking to an agent about this. They were saying, I think that this other agent is a good agent because look how much they've made and look how many transactions they closed. And my response was, that does not make a good agent. That might make a good salesperson, but that's not a good agent. There's two different things. I mean, you kind of you want the healthy mix of both, but it's not necessarily the same thing. So it's tricky. I mean, that's just my 2 cents. Is I definitely have bouts with this too, but I'm curious to see if anyone else has that or input on that.
When Heather was kind of doing her preamble, there was like a period of time I had never heard of imposter syndrome before. So before you kind of really defined it, I had it flipped in my head. I thought it was going to be like something that we need to look in at, that what other people have that we need to like, so we can help those people who might have this imposter syndrome with whatever it is, that we're going to discuss today, so then I was like, oh shit, oh okay, so that's what it is. And I'm like, oh okay, yeah, I think all of us probably have a little element of that.
Yeah.
But when you were talking about how that might surface for you, in terms of like how you your time frame for education, and then when you got into practice, the first thing that was popping into my head, which was different from what may have been popping into your head, is like, well, just look at all of that life experience that you had between that time frame and when you started practicing. That the kids who came right out of school, they don't have that life experience, which I think is way more important in your line of work than the book stuff, So it is interesting how our brains work and like perceive situations and other stuff like that, and like not even knowing that this was a thing, because I'm learning to embrace my procrastination, and I do often rely on that luck factor of life, saying like, oh, I should have done this or I should have done that, but I didn't do that, and time is relative. If it's something that needs to get done and it eventually gets done, it eventually gets done. That's fine, And if it's just stuff for yourself, you have that flexibility. You don't need to worry about it. But if somebody is relying on you, to do something within a certain amount of time, and you have committed to do that thing within a certain amount of time, or they have an expectation of that, then that certainly changes the dynamic. And I think for folks who might, like, I feel like for myself, I kind of employ self-deprecating humor, in terms of like putting myself down in order to make other people feel, and I feel people who may have a lot of, imposter syndrome thoughts that cross their head may be similarly minded like that. And I'm wondering if that self-deprecating humor kind of part of me feeds that to some degree, I don't know.
Yeah. It's interesting that you talked about the procrastination too. I just worked with another mental health clinician to do 6 trainings, and we'd never worked together before. So on our introductory call, she said, can you tell me a little bit about your working style? And I said, well, I'm a big procrastinator because my best work tends to come out at the last minute. I don't know if it's the pressure or if it's just an assumptive thing that I've done for the last 40 years or what. But, if the presentation is on Friday, I tend to do my best work on like Wednesday or Thursday night. And she was like, oh my gosh, girl, you need to stop calling that procrastination and just say you get things done when you get them done. She's like, stop attributing it. And I was like, wow, I'm doing a thing on imposter syndrome in a couple of weeks, and I need to use this for my my backup documentation, because she really did help me understand that my getting things done on Thursday night for Friday morning doesn't change the quality of the work. It just changes the timing of it. So I love that you brought that up.
I love the other piece you talked about with, you can gather a thought and then let it go. Because a tool I learned a long time ago, just for myself, and the agents I coach, I'll talk to this every now and then, is, I think many of us have those voices in our brain, whether you call it the monkey brain, which we don't call it that anymore, or the chatter in your head, but finding out which thoughts propel you forward and which thoughts put you in the muck and mire, and learning for me, it's a visual of turning the volume down. It's like muting that, knowing it's probably never going to go away. If it's your stuff, if it's your thing, it's probably never going to go away, but recognizing when it starts and just going, that's not helpful. And that's that beating up on myself or that language doesn't help. And turning the volume up on something that propels you in the direction towards your goals or towards being a happier person or doing a better job of whatever you're supposed to do. So I love that you said that, because hearing you say that as a practitioner was valuable.
I really am going to have to go research which swiping is correct, but
it's left. So left is go away. Yeah. You're ugly.
Okay. So left is leave.
Left is leave.
Okay. Got it.
I don't want to know. I just have to ask the young girls and guys what that means. Right. So I have no reason to know that.
Well, I have a few clients who use Tinder, and we talk a lot about the immediacy of that gratification, right? And I think what you're saying about thoughts is super helpful, because our thoughts only exist to either serve or not serve us. I know most of you know that I'm not really a black or white person. I really live right in the gray, and I can almost always come up with an either or. But I think what has really helped me is, do I need this or do I not need this? And then I can sort of like swipe based on that. Ellen, you also talked about self-deprecating humor. I think there are so many places that comes from. I really it can come from how we're raised. It can come from our belief system about ourselves. It can come from just that being the way that we laugh about stuff. It doesn't always have to be detrimental. Sometimes it's just kind of the way that we react to things. I tend to be dismissive, where I'm like, yeah, that's not it. That's not it. That's not it. And then I have to revisit things. And actually that leads right into what Isabel just put in the chat. What helped me is learning that I can't control my first thought, but I can control my second. Totally helps with the immediacy of gratification, right? Because I can't necessarily control what flies in, but I can certainly control or have an impact on what happens secondarily. So I love you guys just all tied it all together so beautifully. Thank you.
I love the silence. I don't.
Yeah. Silence makes.
I'm going to bring up a story that Chad and I were talking about yesterday. Is I think I say your thoughts determine your actions. So even those self-deprecating things, how does that influence how you act then? We know where it comes from if it's us and we're doing it. You're either does this make me look fat? No, you look gorgeous. You're either asking for, something to help your ego, suffering ego, or, whatever it is in any event. We got involved with a client that had a complaint. Don't need to go into the detail, but it's an interesting thing. But it was a situation. This person actually ended up in jail because of their thoughts and their actions. Mm. And they basically had determined that everybody was out to get them, so they better strike first. And that if you struck at them and you didn't do what they told you, then you deserved whatever you got. And that was the thought process that got there. And so you really do see it at a very amazing level. And I imagine you see it in your homeless clients as well. You see how your thoughts determine your actions and how your actions then determine the life you lead. And if you can learn to change those thought processes, you can change the outcome in your life. Sorry to get all deep on everybody.
No, I was trying to decide which direction to take my response to that. But I think the really interesting thing about that is that's where the simplicity comes in, right? Not everything that we do has to be super complicated. Not everything has to be because of our childhood. Not everything has to be because of trauma. A lot of times it is, right? And it's important to acknowledge that things are impactful to each human in very different ways. And a trauma I experienced is not going to impact Lisa the same way, even if it's the exact same trauma. So you are correct. And I just want to make sure I'm not like dismissing anything, but our thoughts really are relatively simple to combat. We just have to take the time to do it. And when I think to myself, like if I get dressed up in the morning, or let's say I put my workout clothes on, which by the way, you're always supposed to look nice in. There's that always word again. When I put my workout clothes on in the morning and I look at myself in the mirror and I'm like, I am not going out in public like this. I am the one that's responsible for saying my second thought, which is, damn girl, yes, you are. Yes, you are. You are going to go out in the world like this and you are going to rock whatever workout it is that you're doing. And then you are going to move on with your day, because the simplicity is what helps us change the behavior. So your thoughts do turn into your actions and your actions do then turn into change. I think it's a really good point that you made. Thanks, Lise. Any other thoughts or questions? I know how much Chad hates silence, so I want to make sure I fill it.
I actually, as soon as you mentioned imposter syndrome, I literally like started Googling like, what is this? And I was listening to you, and then like I quickly took a quiz and I was like, my goodness, I have signs. But I actually, it's kind of crazy because I feel like I've been in the business industry for so long where like I self-taught, I learned the fashion industry and manufacturing industry. And I actually grew up in a entrepreneur home. Like my mom was a businesswoman. She has stores in Waikiki, Pearl City, at the flea market. And my dad was this entertainer. So like just listening to you and trying to, I was definitely internalizing a lot of things because I still feel like I deal with a lot of trauma growing up.
Sure.
And one of the things that I do know for sure, like I do get a lot of praises in the industry that I'm in, and coming into the real estate industry, like trying to learn and process it. I know one thing that I do deal with is like worthlessness, because I usually like, I almost give everything away, if that makes sense. Like I've seen so much money come in and I'm like, okay, I'll just give it away. Like it's, and I'm still learning and trying to understand like why, like I know that doesn't make me happy at all. Like I definitely love to work with people, help people out, but I'm learning to also truly feel 100% like, hey, maybe I'm worth it. And I know for sure, like I'm still dealing with stuff from the past, you know? And I don't know if that makes sense. Like I'm just like reading and like listening. I'm like,
Yeah.
I definitely want to be like 100% like the best version of myself, and to not feel like, gosh, I don't even know where I'm going, but I read this. I'm like reading this. I'm reading this quote right now. It says, "You're good enough. You're smart enough, and your doggone it, people like you." And I'm learning. I guess I'm learning to allow the compliments and to receive it well without feeling like inside, like, oh my God, I don't know, like,
no,
like,
you're
really good enough?
You're making total sense. And I think you're actually like literally defining how most of us feel with imposter syndrome, right? The idea of worthlessness is completely a reflection of feeling like you don't deserve to have that. Now, you don't need to change your behavior. You don't need to stop giving away money. You don't need to stop gifting your talents to the world. What this is suggesting, and of course the research is super new, and I'm super stoked that you were interested enough to start Googling during the session, because by all means, go on a rabbit hole. Most of the stuff I found is really helpful. I think this is an opportunity for you to look at the meaning behind what you do and whether or not you're also doing that for yourself. So the worthlessness can be turned into worthfulness. My easiest example to give you is I used to give every hour of my day away, literally all 6 to 8 hours of my day away. And then I realized I had nothing left at the end of it. And so in order to be a more effective clinician, leader, consultant, whatever, I became much more protective of my time to whatever extent you can control. So that worthfulness is also about filling that stuff in you. Like, let's say the next time a big check comes in, maybe you let it sit there for a week. Just like let it sit there. And every day remind yourself, I earned that. I worked my ass off for that. And I'm going to let it sit there. And it doesn't have to mean anything. You're just taking the opportunity to fill that cup rather than like immediately empty it. Good feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. I love it.
Awesome.
And Chad is bomb. And Lisa and all the coaches.
I have to tell you guys, every time we do one of these, like, I know your cup is always refillable, but I feel like mine overflows every time I get to have a conversation with you guys about the things that are really interesting to me, because I really am just bringing you the stuff that I think is honest and relevant. So I'm so grateful that you find this interesting and that you want to learn more. And, you know, I'm always available to email back and forth. You can schedule phone calls with me too. But, you know, I think for me, what helps to change my automatic thoughts is when you guys have these really like lovely, rich and deep, and sometimes like on the darker side feedback for me, because it's really helpful. I just appreciate it so much.
For anyone who might want to reach out to you, are you accepting new clients as well?
Mm-hmm.
How best can they reach out to you?
I'm always open to having a discussion. Let me put my email in the chat.
Should they find you where you are on vacation and just run into you on the beach?
I'm in Puerto Vallarta. I'm here for another 4 days. I will probably be drinking a glass of champagne by the pool, but
ooh, I want a therapy session with a inebriated therapist.
Same here.
Just all glass? Just all glass?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just one. Just
glasses.
4. I don't know.
Muchas.
Yeah, but I'm just grateful to you guys. Thanks for letting me host from Mexico. I haven't had any champagne yet today. Soon.
We can tell. You're super professional. It'll start pouring in 3 minutes. Guys, in the chat, Heather was kind enough to put her email address, Heather at changeworkshawaii.com. So if you guys want to reach out to her as she's accepting new clients, or you have questions about some of the material that she shared, I'm sure she'd be responsive to that. And do you know yet what you're talking about? Oh yeah, sorry, you're gonna know. I was just about to say,
I'm gonna know Thursday night.
I
did drop this teaser last time, so that is an appropriate question. But no, I haven't. You know, I'm always open to suggestions if there's things that you guys want to talk about. Every once in a while, I will text Chad and be like, "What do you guys want to talk about this week?" And he'll be like, "Oh my God, you haven't prepared anything yet." But do I
really say that?
Yes.
So in other words, he plays right into your imposter syndrom.
Absolutely.
Wow.
He sure does.
You know, where I am on the camera, I'm between the two of you. It's so appropriate. You guys are just, I'm attacked right in the middle. Once again, Heather, thank you so much for giving your time, especially since you're on vacation. We absolutely value it. Guys, you know, I want to make sure, Heather pointed out something. I'm gonna say this, as I told her and I chat for like 3 or 4 minutes prior to everyone coming on. And one thing I said, you know, I want more people on here. I want to get like, you know, 80, 100 people on here. I don't see why we can't have this many people, especially when it's such great content. It's not sales driven. It's not real estate driven. It's just self-help and self-care. And she said, she's like, at the time that at that moment, there was only like 2 people in the waiting room. And she said, well, what does it matter? What if the 2 people that we touch are impacted and they go out and impact other people in a positive way? And I was like, you know what? Heather is like a bumper sticker / a good coffee mug / fortune cookie, all wrapped into one. And I was like, she nailed it. She's absolutely right. So yes, but please go spread the word, because bless someone else with such great content and the gift of being able to participate in something like this that doesn't cost anything, and it just kind of lifts your spirit. Hopefully it puts you in the right direction for the weekend and the next month. And I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. And thanks again for stopping in. Take
Happy
care, everyone.
Kamehameha
Thank you,
Day.
everyone.
Aloha, everyone.
Thank you guys. Bye. Have a
Thank you,
good
everyone.
weekend.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Chad.
Bye.